Hey folks, Colin here from Sumthins Recording, and today I'm going to be breaking down for you how we recorded the drums for Van Halen 1 in a home studio. We're going to be looking at recording the drum tones for Van Halen 1 as closely as possible today, but before we dive in, if you're ready to take your snare drum recordings to the next level and really start dialing in your tones, then I have just the thing for you. It is my essential guide to recording snare drum, and it will walk you through everything you need from mic choice to mic placement to setting your input gain to get a great sounding snare drum. No more hassle, no more guesswork. It's a completely free guide, and you can download it below using the link in the video description. Now let's jump in and take a look at these drums here. Here we are inside the DAW. These are all the tracks for the drums here. So we have 2 kick mics, 2 snare mics, a hi-hat mic, 4 tom mics, so a mic on each tom. We actually have 3 overheads, so we have a stereo pair, and then a mono overhead here, and then we have a mono room mic. Let me play you what the drums sound like, and then we'll go into the drum room, and you can see all the mics we have on the kit and where they are. So here's what our drum sound sounds like at the moment. These are raw recordings, not mixed yet, just running through our API channel, as they would have had back when they were recording Van Halen 1 at Sunset Sound. So here's the drum sounds we have at the moment. So it's a very 70s sounding kit, very 70s sounding snare and kick drum. Let me show you how we got this set up. So we'll go into the drum room here and break down our mics and our placement. So here we are walking into the drum room here. You can see we've got 4 toms there, snare drum, kick drum, and quite a few mics on the kit here. Let's start here at the kick drum. It's the first thing out front here, and then we'll kind of go through, break down the toms, the snare, and we'll talk about the overheads as well before we jump back into the DAW. So here on the kick drum, we have 2 mics. So there's one inside the kick drum there. There is an SM48 inside the kick drum, a Shure SM48. And then in the outside here, we have an SM58. So these are both mimicking the SM57s that would have been on Alex Van Halen's 2 kick drums for Van Halen 1. I obviously did not have this many 57s to mic up cabs, bass, and all the drums with as many 57s as they did. So we used 48s and 58s, which are pretty close to 57s that we had on hand for vocal mics. In addition, they didn't use all 57s back then. It was a lot of budget 57s, 546s, as well as regular 56s in that instance. Moving on over here, let's come around the back of the kit here. On the hi-hat here, we have the Slate Digital ML2, I believe it is. It's the pencil condenser version, and this is being modeled as a 451. So they would have had an AKG 451 on the hi-hat. I'll put in the track sheet up on the side, a smaller picture, so you can see what we're talking about as we go through all the mics here. So that's the Slate Digital mic on the hi-hat, just above the back end of the hi-hat here, so we're not getting too much bleed from the kit or much proximity effect. You can see how high we are there off the hi-hat. Continuing around the back here, we did do the taping on the bottom of the top head of the snare drum that Alex does. You can see it's kind of in that A shape there. And that's what he did there. So he had a clear, controlled sound on the top of his snare drum. That was his top head. But on the bottom side of it, so underneath, he would put gaff tape. So that's what we have there, giving it a little bit of dampening. It's that kind of unique sound. And then on our snare drum, of course, an SM57, just right in over the rim here, pointing at the center of the drum. So that's our top snare. If we come around here, there's our bottom snare. It is an Audix i5, so another similar 57 style microphone. Same price point as a 57 as well, about $99, $100. And this is just clipped to the edge of the bottom snare and pointing in towards the center. So trying to keep it as in phase as possible with the top mic. Moving on up here, we try to do as many 421s on the toms as possible. We have the smaller tom here, which doesn't have a bottom head on it, so we're using this cheaper Shure mic. It's in one of their drum packs. It is a, what does that say there? PG 56. So that's what we have on the smallest tom here. And then all the way across, 421s. Again, just slightly in over the rim, pointing towards the center of the drum there. Back on the other side of the kit here, we have 3 overhead mics. Now, I don't have 3 AKG 414s here at my home studio, so we are using 3 57s, and they're being run through the Antares mic modeler to be AKG 414. So 3 57s modeled as 414s. And these are all measured 46 inches off the snare drum. That way, sound from the snare drum, which is our center of the kit, that's our home base in the kit, hits each microphone here at the same time, so we don't get any phase problems when this runs into our DAW. Last microphone we have here for the drum kit is a room mic. So this is another Slate Digital microphone. This is the first one, the ML1, I believe it's called, and this is just being modeled as a 47. So I don't have an 87, and I didn't want to use my desk microphone over there and model it as an 87, so I just put up a 47, and it's not that different, but I also didn't have the capabilities to run it in a figure 8, which is what they would have done at Sunset Sound with their room mic to capture all of them in the room. So it wouldn't have just been a drum room mic, it would have been a room mic to capture the general ambience in the room. Again, that's why they would have had it in figure of 8. So catching the drum kit, and then catching a little bit of bleed probably from all the booths with Eddie and Michael and David Lee Roth as well. Okie dokie, here we are back in the DAW. So now we'll go through and we'll break down what each microphone sounds like, what each kit element sounds like, and we'll kind of build everything back together. So starting here at the kick-in mic. So this is the SM48, the Shure SM48 that's inside the kick drum, about halfway in, just pointing at the beater. And then on it, on every channel here, we're using the Plug-in Alliance, the, what's it called, the Lindell Audio 50 series. So it's emulating an API console, which you can tell by the knobs and the color of it. So it looks like an API console, which is what they were using back at Sunset Sound in Studio One when they tracked Van Halen 1 in the 70s here. Let me play you, this is the kick in here. Just a little bit of EQ on it, no compression, no gating, just running into the channel and using the 550 EQ. You can hear without the EQ, it's pretty mid-rangey there, right? A lot of mid-range that we're cutting here. So we're doing 3 moves here with our 550 AEQ, which is the first slot here on the Lindell Audio 50 series. At the bottom here, boosting about 2 dB at 50. So adding some low end in, because we're not getting a lot of low end with a dynamic microphone like this. So adding as much back in as possible as we can. In the middle here, cutting all 12 dB, so cutting everything we can at 800 hertz. So that's getting rid of as much of that mid-range, that slappy mid-range as we can. And then up on top, another 2 dB at 7K. So getting a little bit of high beater attack rather than all that mid-range beater attack. So one more time, I'll take this EQ in and out. You can hear our before and after on our kick in. Just shifting our frequencies a little bit around to get a tighter sound, less mid-rangey sound. Here is our kick in. I'm sorry, our kick out. That was our kick in. Moving over to our kick out here. Similar moves. So a 2 dB boost here at 50. Cutting all 12 dB at 400 here. So low mid area cut on the kick out. We're not getting as much mid-range because it's not in the middle of the kick drum or inside the kick drum. So cutting low mids here, and then another 2 dB boost up at 7K to get a little bit of air from the front of the kick drum. So the kick out mic, this is the 58 that's just at the hole on the kick drum. So here's what that sounds like and I'll take the EQ out. You can hear our before as well. So not as mid-range as our kick-in mic was. Again, it's because it's not inside the kick drum, getting all that resonance from being inside the wood kick drum. Still a lot of slappy attack on it, so that's why we're cutting all that low mid area and trying to boost a little bit higher just to get a little bit of air, so it's not just some slappy sound, and then boosting more low end again to try and get some of that back, because we're not getting a lot of low end with dynamic mics on a kick drum, which is what they were using back then. They were using 57s on the kick drum. So that's that 70s kind of, I guess, disco sounding kick drum, right? A lot of mid-range here. This is both the kick in and kick out, and I'll take off the channel on it so you can hear what it sounds like raw, and then with the EQs in. So definitely getting a lot more low end and a lot less mid-range kind of flap on it. It gets a lot tighter sounding when we click the EQ channels in on our API here. Moving on down, next mic is our snare top. So this is the 57 on the top of the snare drum. Again, using the Lindell 50 series, so got all of these across our drums, getting that channel sound, or as much of the console sound as we can get, getting us closer to the way they recorded back then. Only a couple moves here. So we got a dB boost here at 100. And then we've got a 4 dB boost at 5K. Take a listen to what our snare top sounds like. And I'll, of course, take the channel out. You can hear our raw sound as well. So not a huge difference there, not cutting any of that mid-range. I like the mid-range on the snare. It gives it that kind of heavy sound, that big wood sound, I guess, or steel sound. I think it's a steel drum. I think it's a Ludwig in there. And then we're just boosting a little bit top end, so getting a little bit of air, waking up the drum a little bit so it doesn't sound so big and so dull sounding. Moving on down, here is our snare bottom now. Not doing much here with the EQ, just a 2 dB boost at 100, so giving it a little bit of low weight, and no boost on the top end here because we don't want it to get too harsh or too crazy. So again, I'll play you the snare bottom, and I'll take the EQ out, or the channel out. You can hear what it sounds like. I like boosting this 100 hertz area, especially on this API on snare bottom, because you get a little bit more low end weight or a little bit more low air coming off of the kick drum from the snare bottom mic. So it's a nice boost to do here just on the bottom part of the API, 100 hertz, and then just 2 dB. Gives you a little bit more low end weight on your snare drum, makes your snare bottom less thin sounding, and you get a little bit more low air coming from your kick drum. So here is both the snare bottom and the snare top mic together, and I will turn off our channels. You can hear the before. Another thing to note here is that we do have the phase flip engaged on the snare top so that our snare top and bottom are in phase. Again, we have two mics pointing in opposite directions, pointing at each other. So one is catching the opposite phase relationship as the other because they're hitting the snare drum, of course. The wave is going down, and this is catching it when it's going up, right? So we have opposite phase relationship there. So we're flipping the phase on our top mic to keep our two drums in phase. Moving on down the line here, we have our hi-hat mic. So this is that slate mic, the pencil condenser one, and it's running through the emulation here to be a 451. Yep, a slate 451. So that's modeling our AKG 451 there. And then again, running into our API console here. And all we're doing here is using our high pass filter. So we have our high pass engaged here and it's up at 300. So we're just getting rid of all of that low end proximity effect that we get coming off our hi-hat from having a mic that close. Take a listen and I'll A-B the high pass filter. You can hear all that proximity effect come back in. Just cleaning up our hi-hat, the bottom end there. We don't need all that bleed, especially coming from our toms and coming from our kick drum. And it's pretty low in the mix because we're getting a lot of cymbals from having 3 overheads like this, but we'll get there in a second. I'm going to play you all the toms together. I'm doing a similar thing on all of the toms. So every tom is running into our Lindell audio channel, and all we're doing on each tom is cutting about 2 dB at 400. No high pass filter, no top end boost, just cutting 2 dB at 400 across our toms. So every tom has this 2 dB cut there in the mid range. That's just keeping our toms sounding like a package while getting rid of some of that low mid mud that you have on all your toms. So EQing them all together there. I still did want to put one on each channel. I could have just put it on our tom bus, but I like getting the overall effect of having the channel strip across each track here. So here's all our toms, and I'll A-B the channel on it here at the end. We have our roll down. So a subtle difference, not going too far with the mid-range there. Still keeping them a little bit low midly because the rest of that I'd rather carve out during mixing than get them, too carved sounding while we're recording. Moving on down here, now we have our overhead. So this is our stereo pair. So this is our left and right. And then again, we have that one up the middle. That is our mono one here. So we'll get to that one in a second. Here is our stereo one. Again, that's the 57. So they're running through the Antares mic mod here. Both of them are, and it's just modeling our 57s as AKG 414s. And then both of them running into the Lindell Audio, the 50, not doing any processing here, just running it through it just to get the console vibe, the analog console vibe. Again, this is across the board. This is actually across the entire song here. Every vocal, the guitar, the bass DI, bass amp, everything is running right through this channel to get that vibe of recording through the API console as they would have at Sunset Sound in the 70s here. So here is our stereo overheads, and I'll put in the mono overhead as well. One of the things that surprised me most about recording drums for a Van Halen 1 cover record like this, and trying to get as close as we could. So looking up track sheets to find the mics they used, where the mics were, everything that they mic'd up. So using 3 overheads like this was the most surprising to me on how effective it was. The kick drum, I'm not really happy with how the kick drum sounds using 57s or 58s like that. The snare drum sound, that's cool to hear, the Van Halen snare drum sound like that. But The overheads really impressed me. Having three overheads like this is such a great picture of the kit. I'm going to play you these one more time. Just the overheads, the stereo pair, and the mono overhead coming up the front like that. It's such a great picture of the drum kit as a whole. I mean, you could get a great drum sound just using those three mics. That's really impressive to me. All right, moving on down the line here. Last mic on our drum kit is our mono room mic. So this is where we're differing 100% from the Van Halen record, or how Van Halen was recording back then. Instead of a U87, we're using a U47. And their U87, again, would have been out in the live room with Michael Anthony and Eddie Van Halen. So it would have caught a little bit of everything, a little bit of ambience from everything, as it was in Figure of 8 as well. This one, we're just using a mono room here. Still running into the Linda audio channel, though. No processing here. I probably would put a shelf on, but I don't have that in at the moment. Just running straight through the channel. Here's what our mono room sounds like. That's probably something I would do later on in mixing, is get rid of all that cymbal bleed coming in from that mic. I'm going to leave that alone for the moment, and we'll tuck it back to where it was inside the drum mix. That's what our mono room sounds like. It gives us a nice low end from the kick drum, which is something you get from using a 47 like that rather than an 87. 87 is going to give you more just room ambience like that, but the 47 always gives a nice bump on the kick drum, which is why I opted for the 47, to give us a little bit of boost in the low end, especially using dynamic mics on the kick drum here. The only thing I haven't put in yet on all of the drums is the tape machine. So they would have been tracking to 24-track tape and then mixing to a 2-track tape machine. I haven't put tape machines across all the track yet to emulate that 24-track, but that'll come later on down the line. We haven't even tracked vocals for the song yet. Let me play you one more time the kit as a whole, and I will pull off everything and put it back in. You can hear how we go from just the raw mics to running through the channel and running through our virtual mics. Getting a lot of great tone from the channel strip there, and of course our mic emulation's helping us out there on our overheads, but those are such a great picture of the kit. That's something I might keep in the drum recording room. I might keep 3 overheads up like that because it is such a great picture of the kit. That's something I like about this. Like I said, I don't like the kick drum sound. I don't like using dynamics on the kick drum, but we're going for as close as possible to tracking Van Halen 1. We did track live off the floor. The only thing we didn't track live off the floor is vocals, because we didn't have 4 members like Van Halen did. Our bass player is singing the lead vocals on this, so we didn't want to track that and have the live vocal bleed in the room. They would have had David Lee Roth in an ISO booth tracking live with the band, rather than in the live room bleeding into all the drum mics or the guitar mics or the bass cam mics. So that'll come later. That'll get overdubbed. Guitars are tracked off the floor, bass are tracked off the floor, and the drums were tracked live off the floor with the rest of the band. I hope this was interesting for you. It was sure interesting and a lot of fun for us to see how Van Halen did it back in the day and try and get as close as possible as we could in a home studio using what we have, using plugins to get the console emulation, like I said at the beginning of the video, if you're ready to take your snare drum recordings to the next level and start dialing in your recording tone, then I have just the thing for you, and it is completely free. It is my essential guide to recording snare drum, and you can download it below to start creating more professional recordings in less time. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.